Welcome to the Scrum Sessions podcast. Here in Dallas, I am Q, and as always with my friend in Berlin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Garion, and welcome to the podcast.
Okay, so Girion, we talked a bunch of stuff today in the Scrum Sessions itself. We had some great discussions, right?
Yeah.
But one thing we didn't have time to talk about is, do we need teams that are specialized in something? Because everybody tells you we have to have T-shape. Everybody can do everything and all that stuff. There's a lot of misconceptions about what T-shaping means. And is everybody T-shaped, or is there a place for a specialist team? What's your take?
So I'm actually sensing that we're going to disagree on that. So first of all, especially for the beginners, I think it's really important to understand where the T-shaping is coming from and what it means, right? So traditionally, you would have traditional orgs with silos, right? You would have a bunch of marketing people in a department. You would have a bunch of finance people in a department. You would have software development in a department, right? And a lot of the delays and problems arose from that structure of the organization where, is, for example, as the marketing people, you talk to the customer and you found out some requirements, right? And you had to hand them over to development, but then there would be delays and you wouldn't know who to talk to. You wouldn't know how to talk to them, etc., right? And so Scrum is breaking all of that up by saying, well, this actually doesn't make a lot of sense. These functional departments, functional silos. Let's just take one finance person, one marketing person, one software developer, one hardware developer, whatever it may be, whatever you need to get the job done, and put them in a small team together so they can learn from each other and so they have all the skills that are needed to actually get something done, right? And so I think this is very important to understand the context of the debate. And actually, I'm going to push back a little bit. Why would you even have non-cross-functional teams? Do you see any reason for them?
Well, you see, I think we're going to get into the idealism versus pragmatism discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. As much as possible, I want to have a cross-functional team. Of course, right? And not only that, I want people on the team to be able to do more than one thing. They have a broader skill set as well as a deep skill set, right? So when I was writing code, I was really good into doing anything C-related, C#, straight C, C++, right? But I also could do a bunch of other things. One of them was architecture. And then eventually I learned this thing about Scrum, and I started doing Scrum things, right? And my brother's skill, what at the time was Scrum, ended up becoming one of my deepest skills a decade later, right? So I'm not against it. However, you also have to be understanding that some skills take a long time to develop. And some situations, I'll give you, for instance, projects that involve defense contracting, that are highly confidential, highly compartmentalized, and etc. Some people are specializing, for instance, radar or heat-seeking sensors and all that stuff. And it has to be that way because they create that component, and that component, for instance, a sensor is going to go on a missile, right? A heat-seeking sensor is going to go on a javelin, for instance, that's going to be used in combat to bring down a tank and etc., right? Now, it doesn't mean that everybody in that team that's building that sensor has to be a specialist, but there is a certain level of people in there that's going to be highly specialized and highly segregated. So that's one situation. There are a few more that I can think about, but that's my point of view. So I don't think we totally disagree. I just see there are, like everything in life, exceptions to the purism, to the idealism that some want to have.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I agree. So for example, if we were to say that being a Scrum trainer is like, very difficult to achieve, it takes a lot of training to get there. And we would be talking about an agile practice, for example, right? An agile center of excellence, whatever you want to call it. We still wouldn't put just 5 Scrum trainers on that team, right? We would still make it cross-functional and say, okay, so we have a Scrum trainer, we have a team coach, we have an enterprise coach, and so on, and try to still make it as cross-functional as we can. So just saying, well, they need a high skill level is somewhat tricky for me. And the reason why I'm saying this is the following. I'm not sure I actually disagree with you. I just see too many people always using this excuse for not making the change over to cross-functional, right? They'll always come up with some sort of excuse, always saying, well, we are different, we are in a highly regulated environment, we have this, we have that. And they can do it, but they are trying to find excuses. So I'm not quite following on this like high skill level. So
No, I totally agree with you. And one thing you probably heard me saying multiple times is, I do not tolerate people saying that with the excuse of customization, that doesn't work here, because that's just hiding a shortcoming, okay? And I don't agree when people are hiding shortcomings with the excuse that it's not going to work here. I work in plenty of regulated industries, and we did a bunch of things that other people in the industry would say cannot be done. No, it could be done. You just didn't have the want to be done because people don't like change, right?
Yeah.
However, I'll give you an example where a specialist team is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I had clients in the past that, of course, we have to automate test, right? Who in these days, especially in the software business, is not going to automate test. And it's not even in the software business. For instance, in hardware, if you get a foldable phone, right, they have those machines that keep folding and unfolding the phone. It has to be automated. You're not going to put some guy in there and doing this on the phone, right? But when we automate things, there is also the need for consistent results in testing and etc., right? And what I noticed over the years is, if you leave, okay, this team automates this way using some tool, this team automates this using a different tool, and etc., right? It becomes a bit convoluted, right? So what we did in the past is, okay, let's try with a community of practice. People come together and they talk about this, they try to standardize tools and etc., etc. Sometimes that works. Sometimes the community of practice is seen as just, hey, I'll go there when I have time, right? So what we notice is creating a team specializing in test automation that would come up with infrastructure, select a tool, etc., etc., and create actually some canned resources that people can use in conjunction with the community of practice and in conjunction with the other teams. So what happened is, this core group of people, they would do a lot of the foundational work. They would expose that work through the community of practice. The other teams would consume that work, but they would also contribute to getting that testing harness better and better and better. So we had testing people at the team level, and we never had dedicated testers. Testing was just part of the T-shape of some of the team members, but we also have a team that coalesced all the information, who brought everything together, who created the standards and etc. And we had that exposed via a community of practice.
Yeah, and I mean, the way you explain it, it sounds like even within that test automation team, they are probably still somewhat cross-functional inside of that whole theme, right? So somebody has a focus on this kind of test automation and somebody on a different one. Yeah, I can see that. And yeah, I'll give this to you. I think there are some cases. Just in general, I'm a little bit allergic to that, because in most of the situations, people just try to stick in that old kind of way of doing things. So I do see some things. And actually, while you were talking, like one thing came to my mind that is really a little bit tricky. So let's say in Scrum, we don't want the teams to get too big, right? And let's say we have one marketing person, 2 backend developers, 1 front-end developer, and maybe something else, right? And so what happens if the marketing person is just fresh out of university, right? How's she going to learn how to be good at marketing if she's alone with people that are not in her functional class, right? Who are not marketers, right? If I'm a beginning marketing person, right, I went to university, but that doesn't teach you everything you need to know. And then I come into the company, I'm joining a team, which is really great because I'm learning all these different perspectives and what's really needed to get product to production. But how am I actually going to learn how to practically do marketing if I'm surrounded by developers all the time?
Yeah, well, that's the point of having a community of practice, right? Having a group where you can learn from other people. And you can also, I am assuming the company have enough space there that there are other marketing specialists where you can learn by pairing with them, right? The concept of apprenticeship that I so much love, as you know, right? But I think still there has to be a way to aggregate that skill as a community so everybody can benefit from lessons learned and the things that are new and people bring, and you can bring speakers to the community of practice external to the company and etc. So there is that. But things like testing, things like architecture for a large corporation, you have to have an architecture group. I am not saying they are going to be the dictatorship that says this is the way you're going to have it, but they can coordinate all the good ideas because good ideas come from everywhere, right? And propagate these ideas. One of the things that we talk very much in the Agile community is the learnings. We talk a lot about the learnings, right? And I always tell people, how do we propagate the learning? Well, this team learn and they're learning all the time. I said, yeah, but you have to propagate their learnings to the other teams in that group of teams, to the department, to the whole organization. It's important to propagate knowledge. It's important to gather ideas from everywhere. Right? So when you have a team that can collect all of this, create a structure around it, and people can work to better that, I see the role of a specialized team. Scrum at Scale calls this a knowledge team. In SAFe, we have the concept of a systems team, right? But we should never use that to hide a shortcoming with the excuse that it's not going to work here or we are different than everybody else.
Yeah. So we agree that you shouldn't go back or stay in functional silos, right? We say you should be as cross-functional as possible. However, don't be dogmatic about it, right? Really, really, really try it. Do it as much as you can. But sometimes there are situations where it's actually smarter to have like an infrastructure team, like a virtual team, like an expert team. Is that how we see the thing?
Yeah, that's the way I see it, you know. And again, I have to reemphasize this. Silos are a very bad thing because silos create bottlenecks. Bottlenecks impede flow. And you know, I am a maniac for facilitating flow. Every other word out of my mouth is usually about product or is about flow, right? So we should never create silos. And silos also create group thinking, which is something we're discussing offline yesterday, right? Group thinking gets very prevalent into companies and creates a lot of damage.
Yeah, so
we
dangerous.
have to be very careful with that.
Yeah,
it's extremely dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like the way I like to always talk customers through it is like to just ask them a series of questions, right? And so once they know cross-functional teams are very useful, I ask them, well, would it make sense to have an IT architect on every team? And then they'll usually say no, right? Because it doesn't make sense, right? Sometimes it might, but usually it doesn't, right? And so then I ask, well, if you have team of teams, like a couple of teams working very closely together, maybe on some component, would it make sense to have one IT architect for every team of teams? And then they might say, well, maybe, yeah, you know, you have 4 or 5 teams and maybe it makes sense to have an IT architect or some other specialized skill in there. And then I ask them, well, does it make sense to have them in a separate team? Because let's not forget, sometimes they need some physical infrastructure, right? Maybe they need a clean room or some kind of really expensive machinery, right? And it doesn't help me to have that expert on my team when I'm very far away from that piece of machinery, right? So maybe I need to have a specialized team for that. So how do we connect those specialized teams into our regular sprint cadence? Like, if I need something from them, how do we like make that work?
Oh, we can make it several ways, right? Like you mentioned, you may have a group of architects for the whole organization, for instance, right? And which is a central point. You can have small nucleus of architects for each one of the departments, for instance, right? So there's less people around involved, but they're always talking to each other and they're talking to the teams. I had situations that we had an architect with a team for a sprint or two or three to help them out with something they didn't know, to transfer knowledge, to help sort of pair program, right? Apprenticeship, helping there. But once that work was done, they would go back to their original team, right? Team of architects. And sometimes they would be there for a while working to something, right? Infrastructure stuff. Or they would go somewhere else to another team. And we even had across divisions, people moving from one division to the other to help out. And what we noticed is that eliminated dependencies, for instance, right? Because, hey, we don't have knowledge about this. Okay, so let's put this on their backlog. And then there's all the coordination problems with that. And we noticed that by moving somebody from that organization into our organization to help with testing, or architecture, or data science, or whatever the case was, we eliminated a lot of dependencies, those things. So I'm not advocating that we have a silo, but it's good to have these teams that are specialists that we can allocate temporarily where they're needed the most.
Yeah.
And that's the business case that I make for the existence of that team. But I like them to be part of an overall community of practice so they don't become the dictatorship and say, hey, we told you to do this way, this is the way you're going to do it. No, they suggest, they inform people, and then we can proceed with whatever the solution is. It's more appropriate to a particular domain, team, organization.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can't have them travel around between teams, you can always do like a service level agreement or something with them. So we need the clean room or the machinery, right? And let's discuss and figure out like what kind of service level we can expect. If it's, let's say we need it in 3 days with like a 95% guarantee that it'll be done, right? And this way you can actually connect a lot of different parts into agile systems.
Yeah, and I actually see the place of system teams or knowledge teams, whatever we call it, in increasing engagement at team level, right? Because one of the things I hear from Scrum Masters and teams is, oh, Q, I'm going to get pigeonholed into doing this for the next 6 years, and I would like to learn something different. I want to do something different. And training, yeah, they pay for training, but training, I go there for 2-3 days, I come back. And sometimes I don't even use this ever again, right? When we have this traveling, let's call them ambassadors, right? That go around, you can be learning from them.
Yeah.
Right? You can acquire new skills from them, real practical skills, because he or she is there to help you, for instance, with test automation. So if you've never done that before, it's much better than a training class. You are learning by doing it. Right? But in order to propagate that knowledge, we have to have a specialized team where people dedicate themselves to this so they can coach, they can mentor, they can teach other people around the organization, but they also can standardize things. As much as we want teams to be self-managing, you cannot have one team using one tool and another team in the same department or organization using another tool to do the same thing.
Yeah.
You are creating waste doing that, right? And in order to have standardization, it's not a dictatorship, but we have to at least have a conversation and have people create that standard. And then we can use the standard or modify it with contributions from everywhere.
And I don't know if you're noticing, but I'm suppressing an evil grin because it's helpful for the IT architects as well, right? If they're traveling, because it keeps them real. Because I don't know if you know this expression, PowerPoint architect, right? You have people that are so disconnected from reality in the position of IT architect, and of course a lot of other different specialized positions that they just don't know what's going on anymore, and they're just living in their own world and making up stuff in PowerPoint. That's really not feasible in any kind of way. Yeah, good point. So
and we actually mentioned that we mentioned that when we talked about Agile coach pet peeves, right? Enterprise coach, they said, I don't care what the teams are doing. You know, I mean, that's not my job.
Yeah.
You know, I want them to do this, but the last time I had a team was 12 years ago, you know, so.
Exactly, yeah. I wanted to mention one more thing, because this is something that's really getting under my skin and that I think is really an unhealthy trend, which I'm seeing a bit more than I used to. And so when we were talking about T-shape, for those that don't know, we are talking about the letter T, right? And meaning that you're an expert at something, right? And so you have a long stem, and then you also have some capability in other fields. Like he was saying, okay, so after some time he was the expert in Scrum, right? But he also knows how to code, and he also knows some other stuff, right? And this is the way we want it to be more resilient, and for a couple of other reasons. But the thing I'm hearing more often now is that you shouldn't actually be T-shaped, but pi-shaped. You know, the letter pi, 3.14, right? And it has two stems. And this really drives me crazy, because I think this is kind of the theme of our times, right? We're always demanding too much from people, right? It's not enough to be an expert anymore, right? Because this is what T-shaping actually says. It says you have to be an expert and you have to be some more, right? So we're already asking people to be experts. We are already asking them to be more than experts, because we would like them ideally to know some more things, right? And now some people are coming along and saying, well, you need to be expert at two things and then know some stuff. And honestly, give me a fucking break, people. This is too much. You're demanding too much of people. And let's just try to have people T-shaped. Yeah. This is working very well. This has been battle tested. And don't just keep asking people to add stems to that. It's not possible, right? And usually those people that talk about it are not expert at anything, right? So please, 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 if you hear this pie-shaped thing, please think back to us, and please don't use it anymore, because you're just demanding too much of people, and it's really not helping.
Yeah, which brings the point of cognitive load, right? There is so much you can handle, there's so much you can learn, there's so much you can practice. And you're going to end up, like you mentioned, a master of absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And you're also going to be awfully stressed because of that.
Yeah.
So I believe that it's good to have primary skills, the bottom of the T, and the additional skills in here. We always have to be able to do a little bit more than just this thing in here, right? Otherwise, we don't survive.
Yeah.
Now, asking the person to have the base of the T is this wide, or there's two bases for the T, right? And then that's even worse. That's cognitive load gets to the point that you're going to be overstressed and underproductive, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people talk about team happiness, but nobody's going to be happy, team or person or whatever, with a cognitive load that's just destroying your brain. So the specialist teams help alleviate a lot of the cognitive load. But this is not a license to make a silo of everything and have specialist teams for everything. Because that actually slows down the system and impedes flow through the system. So we have to be careful not to just assume that one solution takes care of everything. And we should be very careful not to demand from people now that it's beyond what is humanly possible to deliver, right? We can use automation, we can use AI, we can use a lot of things to help us out into achieving a mission without trying to overload somebody and then having some really bad results.
Yeah. Very good.
I think that's it for today, my friend. And next month we'll come with another interesting subject,
Hopefully
and,
interesting.
You guys can watch. Yeah, we'll find some interesting things. The latest ones have been very interesting, right, from the feedback we got today from the session. So you guys feel free to ping Gary on and I any way, shape, or form, either through the streaming platforms. We are pretty much everywhere, right? To LinkedIn, to our emails. We always want to hear from you guys. Like us up in the platforms, give us feedback, suggest ideas. We're always looking for stuff so we can help people do a better job in being an Agilist, right? And that's it for today. That's for this episode on the podcast. Here in Dallas, I am Q. I hope you liked, and I'll see you next time. Gary on, up to you.
And this people is Q for you. He says everything that has to be said, and then he says, up to you, Gary on.
Yeah.
So thanks, guys, for listening in. I hope you join us again soon, and goodbye from Berlin. Bye-bye.